Okay, so we are back for the review of Ys. We just beat the game. We played a little bit with Time Attack and the New Game Plus features. So let's start off with a short summary for people looking, I guess, for final thoughts without heavy spoilers. If you're looking for a game with really fun movement options and pretty solid combat, I will say this game is for you. If you are looking for a good story or a well-rounded universe, I feel like you are going to be immensely disappointed. So from this point forward, we're going to be talking all spoilers from all chapters. I feel like this is kind of a hard game to really break down into certain categories, so I feel like I just want to take you through a journey of how we felt about the game and how it evolved over time, because this game is a really hard one to rate for me. It's not like as black and white as some of the other games where it's like, wow, I love it, or wow, I hate it. This game is very flawed, but I think there's enough positive things to say about it that I could say it's fun, whereas I can't say that about some of the other games that we've come into. So we'll start things off, I guess, at the intro chapters. You know, it introduces you in a prison break scenario. It does a little bit of flashback, flash forward, and it introduces the main gimmick of the game super early on. So we end up getting the ability to become a monstrum. What is a monstrum? Well, a monstrum ends up being like a superhero slash a superpower character. So every character we get starting with Adol going forward will gain some kind of ability that will enable them to progress in a dungeon in a very unique way. I will say that this is probably the strong suit of the game. So Adol, for example, starts off with the ability to zip to certain zipline points. So instead of the game just being on a single jump or double jump and extending your jumps with normal swipes, like you might have done in the other Ys games, you take on a theme of the character. We were called the Crimson King, so I guess that's kind of vampire-esque. Yeah, Gothic Power Rangers is a good way to put it. And we now have a very vertical level. And I was thinking, wow, this is really great in terms of movement. Like, I had a lot of fun with this game's prequel. I really like the story of the prequel as well as the character. So I'm like, wow, I'm excited. It's already like a big upgrade on movement and things feel fast. And it's like, okay, you know, you're going through tutorials. And we already start hitting some problems as soon as we get out of the prison, unfortunately. So we're introduced to a majority of the cast right off the bat. But the gimmick of the game, too, is that when you're in this monstrum form, you're basically in an alternate identity. So, like, people will technically not recognize Adol, for example, just as we will see characters in their monstrum form, but allegedly not recognize who they are. Now, obviously, you know, the execution of that could have been much better. There's not really a reason for a lot of them to not try to help us. And well, actually, I'll circle. We'll pause on that plot point because that is going to tie into something I had a problem with the entire game. But let's just say the idea is that gradually each chapter you're supposed to gain a character, you gain a new movement ability, you gain a new team member that's really great in combat. They all play very distinctly. And I will say, the look of the monstrums are great. I like their outfits. I like some of their themes. I feel like some of them weren't quite coordinated. Like, we had some animal themed ones with like Raging Bull. We have White Cat, who I think chat will agree is the best character in the game and is completely broken. Unfortunately, both good and bad for combat reasons. She kind of trivializes the entire point of the game. So what I mean by that is that for those not familiar with the older Ys games, or even the game before this, Lacrimosa of Dana, whenever you're fighting an enemy will have a weakness to a damage type. And you're like, okay, you know, you're used to things like weapon triangles and things in other games. Like, okay, you know, that's simple, straightforward. But there's an exception to this rule. There's something called the stun gauge that builds up below a boss's health bar in particular. And if that stun gauge is maxed, which is raised more quickly by using skills that build stun, you could put the boss in a defenseless state briefly, where every strike will recover SP, or the skill power, whatever they call it. I actually don't remember other than it's SP, in order to spam skills. And its defense will be lowered, and that's like your big opportunity to strike. The problem is White Cat is too good at stunning. How good is she at stunning? I literally beat the game. For people that watch the gameplay, I beat the game with base weapons and base armor on the normal intended difficulty And at no point during the plot, at any plot boss, did I ever have to use a healing item or a revive item. There's a small little asterisk. We fought a super boss in the game that made me revive one character. That was the only time I needed to use items because I decided I did not really want to refight that boss. It took a while to do. So she is way too good. Like, I appreciate that you can activate a boost mode, which is basically if you use skills on an enemy, you'll build up a secondary bar beneath your SP meter. You could pop it. When you pop it, it gives you health regen, and you get greatly reduced damage. In fact, you get greatly reduced damage as long as you're doing any skills at all. So if you're not used to the dodge roll of the previous game, where you just do like a preemptive dodge right before it strikes you in order to get something called flash move, which helps you out building all your necessary meters, or if you're not good at parrying, because there's no block button in this game, you are expected to dodge anything thrown at you. But if you tap what is by default the skill button, you could create a little shield around you to parry. And if you mash that, you can build a lot of SP. So it's kind of like, if you flash guard, you crit, and you can build skill points, yada yada. The problem with it is that White Cat is so good at stunning by the midpoint of the game that you can literally spam her S-rank skill that stuns. That is the best skill in the game, which you get really early. I want to say we had that by chapter 3 or chapter 4. Yeah, it's an optional super boss. That's a good point. We were like 30, well, we're at least 25 levels or more lower than the intended level, and we fought it with base weapons, just to give you an idea how broken this character is. But unfortunately, because of the skills that you could do with White Cat, she unfortunately makes every character you get feel really weak and pointless, and she never leaves your party, ever. I don't think there's a single point where you don't play with her while you're still able to play with all monstrums. So she is just like the best character. She could spam her stun move, the boss gets stunned. When the boss is stunned, you build up your SP. You could use SP to build up boost. Then as the boss goes to wake up, you pop boost. You can end boost early by doing a boost finisher, and that boost finisher applies even more stun than her skills do. So with the right sacraments, which are kind of like passive relics that can impact gameplay, kind of like a party-wide equipment slot if you want to think of it that way, where basically we pop our boost, do the boost finisher, do 2 or 3 of our stun skill. That's enough to rebuild boost yet again if we have a full boost bar, to at least put it to 50%. Then we boost again. Then we do 2 to 3 of the stun skill, and the boss gets stunned again. Even with base weapon on normal, even with base weapon, it was still good enough to stun. This character is broken. Now, it was really fun to play with her. They did give some challenges when it came to combat outside of just stun loops. There were several bosses that you're not expected to defeat, or just straight up were immune to stun. And those were probably the most fun for me to fight. Unfortunately, most of them are extreme late game. So once you kind of get that S-rank stun move, or even get vaguely near it due to White Cat's boost being available literally the moment you get her, she kind of invalidates most of the game. So if you are looking for a challenge with the combat, I cannot recommend anything lower than normal. In fact, or not even normal. I don't think I could recommend lower than hard. Normal was way too easy, as evidenced by our playthrough. In fact, I would almost say, even if you were new to the game, I would still even put it 1 difficulty slot higher. If you're expecting more of a challenge, this game is probably the easiest Ys game that we've played. Now, granted, I think we saw at the very high difficulty, the game gets, like, actually kind of overtuned. Like, we entered a battle in New Game Plus on the first boss of the game, which is only level 4, as a level 97 character, and that boss fight was like 2.5 minutes, and that felt just overtuned. So to me, it had like very weird and not really balanced difficulty. But I will state that this game's hard is kind of like the other game's easy, honestly. Lacrimosa normal, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, that level 4 boss was actually ridiculous. So I just can't recommend going lower than hard mode if you are interested in the game at all. So anyway, big detour from what we're talking about. So the big problem with the game, other than White Cat literally invalidates every other character, is the best character by far, no question, no character even comes close, is that a lot of these characters that we come across, both from the standpoint as non-playable characters and the monstrums, are just so unlikable. Like, man, they are just like, One Note almost gives them too much credit with some of their character gimmicks. Like, there were some characters a bit more fleshed out. Like, White Cat probably had the most going on for her with her story of being a thief and going through a redemption arc. But then, like, you immediately get a character like Hawk / Credo. And this character is such intense garbage. This character is so One Note. You can summarize every cutscene this character is in with, oh, I want to fight him, or, oh, I'm gonna post Shadowlord / the figure of authority, or, I'm so cool, I don't have to be nice to anybody. And he is just so unlikable. It's like every cutscene, I'm like, is he ever gonna change? And I will spoil this in our final thoughts. He doesn't. He's a terrible character from start to finish. They try to go through this really BS Heart of Gold moment with him and one of his backstory characters, and just throw it away. It's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. Yeah, it's like being cool is just being a jerk and like completely insufferable. And I think paired with another character, Iris, who you get later, who's a wannabe assassin, they are just like the most irritating characters. So I will say, from a plot standpoint, I pretty much lost interest as early as Chapter 3. And given that Chapter 1 is basically just the prison break, that's pretty bad, given that there are 9 chapters in the game, and the first chapter is purposely very short. So I was pretty much turned off from the plot really early on. So I was hoping for something kind of interesting, where there was kind of an ongoing mystery, like Lacrimosa of Dana, or an East 7, for example, where it wasn't really clear who the villains were, but we could see what they were doing, and we were playing kind of a catch-up game with them. This game is like really, really painfully transparent about a lot of things. If you pay any amount of attention to the plot, it's really, really obvious where it's going. I will say there's only one plot twist but I personally did not call, involving the final villain. Not the final villain's master plan as of like Chapter 3 or Chapter 4, but more like the reveal of that villain is possibly the worst reveal I have seen in a game. I don't even want to spoil it, but it was terrible. I was like, my jaw was open and I'm like, that's who the final villain is? Really? And I was like, I just felt such immense disappointment. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil it. I felt so much disappointment for it. I was actually flabbergasted. I was like, I barely remember that character. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be cool that it's a character you could have seen potentially as early as like Chapter 2, Chapter 3. But like the reveal that is the villain, it's like it landed with such a thud. I honestly was like almost at a loss of words when it came there. I don't think it was meant to be funny, but I was like laughing at how stupid it was. I was just like, wow. We had like a moment of applause. We did. It was something else. So let's talk about some of the other characters. So we talked about Hawk Credo, who you get in Chapter 3. Chapter 4, you get, I guess it would be Doll. I guess you get Doll next. She's probably the most inoffensive character. She kind of grows throughout the story. She's got a little character growth. She's very straightforward. I don't really have any complaints about her, other than I wasn't really impressed with Slash characters in this game. Adol and Doll, both being Slash characters. I didn't really care about their ability. Again, a lot of the gameplay came down to how much damage could they output and how well could they stun. I didn't really feel like Doll did a lot of damage, and her stun was pretty bad, as was Adol's. Credo actually did feel very powerful when you first get him, and it kind of like plays into the lore of the character, but he also kind of fell off in our playthrough. Like, granted, if you keep leveling their equipment, unlike we did, maybe he'd be more useful. But yeah, their damage kind of falls off kind of fast. The game kind of wants you to go on a... Oh, that's the other thing, actually. We'll take one more step back. So aside from the unlikability of some of the characters, the way you progress the plot is super disappointing. So let's go back to Chapter 2. So you leave the prison, you kind of go through things, you get invited to your first Grimwald Nox, which is kind of like a giant raid battle, if you're familiar with Lacrimosa, and you're supposed to just go on fighting these people. And get ready to do this every single chapter multiple times in order to unlock bonus areas and progress the plot. it feels like really bad padding. Like, you can't just go into another district in the city. It's like, but thou must do enough side quests and or fight random encounters to build enough Nox to earn the permission to do a Nox battle in order to progress the plot. And that kind of dragged the game down quite a bit. It didn't feel really good in terms of pacing. Like, Lacrimosa with the raid mechanic did have a couple of forced story ones, but I think the number that were required was nowhere near as offensive as it was in this game. Like, if you were to do purely only the story ones, I think there were like at least 11, I want to say, forced long siege battles where you're fighting multiple, not just like a couple enemies, you're fighting like waves of enemies. So like each one of these is taking somewhere between like 5 and 10 minutes. Depending on how powered up you are, maybe like 3.5 minutes if you're lucky. You still have to wait for like spawn times, and then there's bosses, and some of them gimmicks. Like sometimes you don't actually fight the enemies, you're just looking to pop little crystals. Like they all have their gimmicks. They're not super interesting, and it's really unfortunate that they're forced. It's just very generic, bland, reusable landscape, and the sky is red. Like nothing really cool about them at all, I'm gonna be real with you. And so you couple that with like a plot that is like super paper thin. Honestly, I think we predicted almost the entirety of the game by chapter 4. So not even halfway in, we knew like almost every single plot point. It was pretty bad. Even in chapter 3, honestly, I think we guessed most of the plot points just by playing along. So like there's not really a lot to look forward to from like plot point, because it's just going to make you go to these Noxes over and over and over again. And I was not a fan. Now, if you like combat, you're like, hey, an excuse for combat. Sure, that's fine. But personally, it was not for me. Even though I like the combat of the game, I just felt like those were very forced. And in particular, this game has a ton of pacing problems, because the game like really wants to be 9 chapters. It pads and stretches every chapter so much. So kind of tying into the fact that you need 100 of this Nox gauge in order to activate the main plot to continue. Some of these side quests were just so bad. I mean, like, I think by the time I got to like chapter 7 or chapter 8, I did an equivalency where I said like, this kind of quest being mandatory, not even optional, this kind of quest being mandatory in the game reminded me of like a bad MMO. Like, we literally got a fetch quest to go pick flowers and get ribbons as a plot quest. Why was that even in there? And then they make you backtrack to a dungeon you've already been to, but you can't use any of your warps because the game wants you to see cutscenes. It is so poorly done. It is so bad how bad those side quests and at later points the story gets, with just like really bad padding. Like, this stuff would barely be optional in other Ys games. So my expectations were much higher, and I felt extremely disappointed doing a lot of these kinds of quests, to the point where I honestly, this is probably the first Ys game I felt like skipping a majority of the dialogue. A lot of it was just inane one-note rambling from really annoying gimmick characters like Iris, who wants to kill the Governor General. And if you help me, chat, if she had other personality traits other than wanting to kill people and just being as obnoxious as possible. Like, seriously, it was just really hard to get through her. I think she might be one of the worst female characters in games this year. I think she is only competing with the infamy of Nanami from Suikoden 2. Like, honestly, she was really bad, as was Hawk slash, or yeah, I almost called him Crow, slash Credo. They were honestly some of the worst characters we've interacted with in terms of protagonists. So like, it is just so grating to get through those plot points. Yeah, just super insufferable. Like, this character, like every single plot point is like, oh, but I want to kill the Governor General. Just like, just every line ends with that, or, oh, you couldn't stop me, or something. It's just like, shut up to some of these characters. And I get that maybe they were supposed to be endearing for some people, but they are just so flat and unlikable. It just, you know, like, if we want to talk about character development, even like their strongest characters in this game had absolutely terrible character development. Like, I like White Cat from a combat standpoint, and her personality was fine, but like, like I think chat had like the exactly. I was literally about to say chat knows what I'm gonna mention. Like, so she gives up the life of a thief to run the flower shop, and the ongoing joke with me and chat, at least when we played this game, is that she's never running the damn flower shop that she's supposed to be doing to give back to the community. You have like one side quest with it to give flowers to people for her business, and that's it. The whole game. You don't even have to visit it again. It's crazy. I just feel like there were so many missed opportunities. And I feel like we were seeing a lot of laziness. Like, that is just the best way to describe the plot. There is so many tropes that if you were to literally just BS your way through what you think the plot would be based off of an average JRPG, you would probably get almost this entire plot without having played a single Ys game before. Because it is very heavy into the tropes, and not in a good way. They don't do anything interesting with them. They play them very straight and very vanilla, which makes them also extremely insufferable when you get characters like Iris and Credo, who are like, oh, I guess I changed my mind. Oh, not really, I'm still a jerk. Like, they have the same plot arc. They have the same plot arc, chat. I hate those characters. But it's just like, from the standpoint of going through and just like doing something unique with the game excelled wonderfully. There is a lot of brokenness with the movement, but I feel like that's kind of, you know, it's expected. It's an Ys game. Of course, you're going to go out of bounds at some point. I don't have that high bar of quality when it comes to making sure you don't break the sequence of the game. But, like, man, the characters were just so disappointing. And this is coming off of, like, really interesting characters, in particular from Lacrimosa. Like, we were just talking, like, right before the final thoughts. Like, we never had a character where we're like, wow, that character is so awesome. Or like, oh, I want to see what's next with this character's plot. Like, example from the chat would be Sylvia. Sylvia was so amazing in Lacrimosa. She was the unexpected character in Lacrimosa. And I was like, man, I didn't see this coming, but that's cool. I like this. I like where this is going. Or like, a great example is that there is a character you're supposed to hate in Lacrimosa, where he's like a snobby, stuck-up noble. And then like, that character very, very slowly has a character arc. You're not really supposed to like them by the end, but they become a little better as a person. The problem is that they made a character like that the actual protagonists. They made that character like a protagonist, but they didn't even really have a redemption arc. Like, they did Sir Carlin, but worse. I'm like, why even, like, don't make me try to like this character after putting up with them. I'm like, I can't stand their dialogue. It's just absolutely horrendous. Unlike, I think chat was cheering when we played Lacrimosa and Sir Carlin's boat sank, for example. Like, nobody was rooting for this character, and we were at that level with more than one character in this game, just to show, like, how horrible these characters are. In particular, in terms of personality, but just, and also in general, just how little development they go through. Yeah, we cheered the boat sinking for sure. We're like, thank you, giant kraken monster or whatever is in the ocean. Just kill this character, like, please. But just don't let him come back. Like, please don't let this character come back. Like, this is the character death we all accept and love. So I guess, like, in terms of where the plot doesn't work, so we talked about things are gated, you have to do side quests. A lot of the side quests are very generic things you'd see in MMOs. A lot of them are just like, talk to X NPC, then talk to Y NPC, visit said location, return to sender. Like, they're very, very loopable, very repeatable, very non-memorable. We cheered Credo ditching us to the dark side. No, I want to... Yeah. Oh, actually, you know what? We'll talk about that before I talk about the plot point that's been bothering me throughout the whole game. So Credo is supposed to be like the soul of a berserker, which they only reveal to you literally one chapter before the end. And they're like, oh no, Credo's going kill crazy. Look at how much of a monster he is for killing the Lemurs, or whatever they call the monsters in this game. And then it's like, when you reflect back how he acted from chapters 3 till this chapter, it's like, every single time he tries to challenge everybody to a duel, and he talks about how happy he is to kill things in the different raids. I'm like, is this really different? Is Dark Side Credo any different than non-Dark Side Credo? I'm like, he's saying the same lines. It's just our characters are for some reason disturbed by it, even though, like, literally in his introduction chapter, he was pummeling helpless, defenseless guards and like killing random Lemurs. Like, that's how he was introduced. So I'm like, nothing really changed with him. other than I guess he learned to smile. I guess that was his plot arc. But I'm like, he's already smiling while he was killing people. Is this really even considered character development at all? He's still a jerk to us. Like, nothing really changed there. But anyway, let's talk about the padding one more time. So, unfortunately, they have a character called Aprilis, who, I guess I'll spoil it. It's supposed to be a... semi-spoil it, I guess. There's supposed to be a famous historical figure from the actual real-life 100 Years' War. And the problem with this character, as well as Shadowlard, head of the Hieroglyph Knights, who's a major antagonist through most of the game, is that none of these damn characters want to tell you any plot points. There are so many different times in the story where those characters do things and they're like, oh, but you're not ready. You have to see it with your own eyes. My words cannot describe the things that you need to understand. I'm like, screw you. You tell me the damn plot. You've known this since before chapter 1. This is so BS. This is worse than Zestiria in terms of plot nonsense, where we had multiple characters, some even semi-allies, that knew the damn plot, and they didn't want to tell us the damn plot. Like, how many chapters before that gets tedious? Spoilers, they did it as early as chapter 2, and all the way to like chapter 8, they kept doing it. I'm like, why? For what purpose are they still not telling us the plot? And we were all laughing, in particular for Aprilis, when Aprilis is struck down in a very dramatic fashion, which, spoilers, has no weight or emotional impact at all due to some other point I'm about to mention, is that it's just like, the character could have just told us these things. Like, it's bad. They knew who the main villain was. They mostly knew what the main villain's plans were. They knew where the main villain's hideout was. They knew how to reach the main villain. They knew the background story of every single one of our characters in the party. But it's like, oh my gosh, you could talk about her quote-unquote death. It's fine. No one should be playing this game for plot at this point. So if you're done in terms of spoilers, you don't want any more spoilers, I'm letting the chat talk about Aprilis' death scene, because that's one of many scenes that really annoyed me due to another plot point, which ties into learning about all these different characters and how they all conveniently start becoming friends. It ties into one other big thing. So this is your last chance. We're going to come into it. How did they bury her, given the plot point you're about to talk about? So, right. So, one thing I really do not like in video games, or even just stories in general, and Chad has known this because I've gone on a couple tangents before, I really do not like clones. I don't like clones. I don't like them as a writing device. I don't like them as protagonists. I don't care for them as antagonists. I can give them more leeway if they're supposed to be evil. They're just very boring if they happen to be a clone. Like, I'm just stating it. It's not interesting. Clones have been done to death. Amnesia has been done to death. Let those plot points die. Stop bringing them back in, like, 2020, 2022. Like, just let them die. So, you know, the big twist of the story, because there tends to be one big twist in each Ys game, like, maybe an ally you thought was an ally is actually a villain, or maybe the villain isn't so bad and there's some other big bad behind it, or they have some good reasons to do these things, and maybe there's some emotional conflict. This plot twist is clones. Every character, including the character you play as that's given the Monstrum abilities, is a clone. So, like, already my interest in the story hits, like, negative values, because I super don't care about clones. And so, like, when they have this death scene later with Aprilis, the clones usually explode into sparkles when they die, so there's no body to bury if they happen to go. But the thing with Aprilis is that a big reason I don't like clones is the question you could just ask yourself is, well, if they just cloned them once, why don't they just clone them again? And lo and behold, Aprilis' big death scene is undone in like an hour of story, and they bring back Aprilis immediately. No challenge in order to do so. It just happens in the background. She just happens to be alive again because there just happens to be another clone. And it's like, all weight from the story is gone, because you're like, okay, well, if any of our characters dies, they're going to be recloned. Because that's the whole point of the story. 500 years ago, during the 100 Years' War, all of our people that are now monstroms were all comrades in arms under the famous historical figure Joan of Arc, aka Aprilis. And it's like these characters have been brought back over and over and over and over again. So like one thing you'll kind of catch on early in the chapters is all these characters are orphans, which is kind of suspicious. And then like by chapter 4 and 5, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is definitely plot relevant that they're all orphans. But again, like the problem with it is like, instead of Aprilis / Joan of Arc explaining to her comrades what their purpose is or why they're doing this, she just doesn't tell them. Why doesn't she tell them? I don't know. I don't know why she doesn't tell them. She told every other version of the clones what their purpose was, and they died. This is the first time that, because the big bad spoiler reveal, which that is the only thing I will not spoil, is the big bad villain spoiler reveal, is that she was left on her own. So instead of them being trained immediately to be monstroms, they were left in an orphanage and led different lives, and eventually their duty to basically battle the evils of man given physical form, aka the Lemurs, aka malevolence, if we're talking about Berseria and stuff like that. Yeah, like instead of ever telling them at any point in their own lives or their own story, we have to literally wait until after said character is dead to get any relevant information that these characters are clones. And would have been nice to know why they were cursed to begin with and all those other things. And of course, one of the characters conveniently has amnesia, so Doll can't point out the fact that she knows Aprilis. Yada yada yada. Like it just it's just so annoying, chat. And like I think almost every character you interact with is a clone or a lie, which is really funny because it factors back into the laziness. So you have the laziness of the writing where oops, clones did it, and they don't do anything interesting at all with the clones. They even take away any moral dilemma with you, where you have to decide whether or not the clones live or die in a side story, and some other character just kills them for you. So you don't even get to feel like any remote chance of feeling you might be doing the wrong thing during this game. Those decisions are taken away from you. Either a villain does it for you, or you're given a yes, I agree, or I agree, and that's why we should do it now kind of options from Adol. So you as a player are not able to make any kind of interesting moral dilemma decisions that have any impact on the plot whatsoever. Like you are on the straight and narrow all the way through, which is most unfortunate. Yeah, Anamona, aka Amnesia Mona, exactly. I was going on a big rant about clones, laziness. So they reused so many character sprites. It's like it was becoming a joke at one point that they have all of these quasi-named characters. What I mean by that is they're not just like townsperson A is talking. Like we'll have like the head of the arena, the announcer is speaking, or we'll have Noble who is related to Shantae and is looking to become a chef, right? You have like two characters with like distinct different professions in two different sub-stories, and in some case main stories, and they keep reusing the same character models. I think we saw Snobbish Rich Man with the mustache 4 or 5 different times as different characters. So ironically, the side story stuff got complicated to follow if you're actually interested in lore, because they just kept reusing the same damn models over and over. Like we had like Blacksmith Apprentice at least 3 times. We had like generic townsperson at least 4 times with the top hat. And it's like, if you're gonna do side quests involving these characters, probably don't make them the same models if they're then actually used in story points. Because then it's like, is this guy also the chef? Or is this guy also the boatsman or something? It gets really funny. And at one point we get a reveal, which, again, I will try very hard not to spoil, that they show the face of a guard. And it's supposed to be this big twist. They're like, I've seen this person before, for example. And then I'm like, which guard is it? Like, I honestly asked that question. I'm like, which guard was it we saw in like chapter 1 versus the guards we interacted in chapters 3 through 6? What were their names? Which ones did they look like? I'm like, is this the guy that helped us out of prison in like one of these chapters? Is this somebody we just overheard? because they're like almost literally the same character model. So I was like, I actually don't know who that is. I don't like, why did you reveal one of these things to me? And I was just kind of laughing at it because again, like they don't have like good unique models. So I feel like they bit off a little more than they can chew. I didn't really like the concept of the town, both from like a central hub standpoint, but also just like an exploration factor. So, like, a lot of the story is gated. Like, you literally cannot go through the gates of one area to go to another outside of, you know, going out of bounds, but that's classic Ys. And the problem with it is just, like, now what would have been, like, really easy to reach stores or having, like, one or two simple merchants, like in an Ys 7, where, like, this is your dedicated armor, this is your dedicated, like, item person, is that this game spreads out all the shops. But then it's like, oh, we kind of understood that would be a problem because it's not really fun going to like 20 different merchants every single chapter to see what upgrades. So they introduce a character that could do that shopping for you, but then like they just immediately mess it up where they go like, oh, this character can go to everybody's shop for you, but they can't get rare items. So you still need to check every single shop again anyway. Like, there's just so many decisions where they were, like, so close to making the big city not feel like a big hassle or a big annoyance. And it just kind of flubs it. Like, they take, for example, the ability to find landmarks from Lacrimosa, and you could use them as warp points. If those did not exist in this game would be, like, borderline unplayable. There's so many times you have to backtrack between districts and dungeons. It's just like, oh my gosh, sometimes going through the map. But yeah, it's like, it's kind of fun to climb up the city walls, but then later on you're like, I just really want to go from point A to point B, and you've locked me out of the warps for story reasons. And like, damn, that just takes forever to go to one side of the town to the other. In particular for the ending, when we were going from one end of the town to the other, I was like, oh my gosh, please put on dash boots or something. This is actually horrendous. But yeah, you don't really have like a lot of, like, it is interesting to explore a city with the ability to wall run, which is what White Cat gives you, or glide, which is what Hawk gives you. Like, that kind of stuff is interesting, or opening up dungeons with Raging Bull smash ability. Like, a lot of that is interesting. It's just like, the fact that like more than 60% of the map is purely from places in town, more or less, and there's only like 4 outdoor areas and the final dungeon I think you go to that are considered separate from that. It does feel kind of samey after a while, so like the novelty wore off by like chapter 2, chapter 3 for me. Well, not chapter 2, it wore off by like chapter 3 for me, where I was like, oh cool, I can glide around the city, maybe I could use this to go. Oh no, invisible wall says no, you're not allowed to progress. And then the game is like, hey, do you want to open up more optional areas not related to the story? Better get ready to grind another 100 Nox. Hope you're ready to do every single sub-story. Or grind out for like 30 minutes just to unlock a like 1.5 minute exploration area. I don't know. Yeah, it's just, and like, if you compare it, like, I'm gonna compare it to the other Ys games, and the easiest one to compare it to is Lacrimosa. Like, think about how much variety you had on one island in Lacrimosa compared to this game. You had jungle, you had swamp, you had a little bit of desert, you had beaches, you had mountaintops, you had caves, you had like all these different areas, and they all connected in different ways, and you could find alternate paths to go through them as you gain new relics and things like that to help you go through. This game, it's like you get city, and you get city, and you get city, and you get city. And I guess you get an outdoor plains, one deserty area, and one mountain path. And that's it. Everything else is just kind of samey. Yeah, like Lacrimosa, it actually was fun to explore. But, you know, it was still fairly linear in a sense. And this game, like, it was also linear, but it also was just kind of like, oh, I'm just in a town, whatever. Yeah, like, if Lacrimosa had all the movement options that this game have, I feel like Lacrimosa would be the perfect Ys game, for sure. Like, it didn't do too much to change combat, so honestly, if it even kept Lacrimosa's combat, it wouldn't have been a big deal for me either way. They both had the concept of flash move, flash guard, and it was, like, good enough, do you know what I mean? But yeah, I just feel like without those, without, like, the really solid writing or, like, plot connection with some of these characters. A lot of it just felt kind of trivial. So, like, there wasn't really, like, a great reason most of the time that the people stuck around with us other than the plot forced them to. Like, there wasn't really a driving factor for most of them. I don't know. We just kind of bumped into them, and then once we found out their identity, we became friends. But, like, they didn't have a reason to not do that with us to begin with. Either, like, none of them really sought us out. Only we had to seek them out for some reason, even though we're allies. Felt a little weird, chat. It just felt weird. Like, compared to, like, a Lacrimosa where you're finding survivors, and you know, like, you can't survive on your own, so you're building up a camp, and you're building up this place to slowly be more, like an actual base, and then you want to defend said base to defend the people. I didn't really get that feeling when I played this one. Yeah, Raging Bull. Yeah, Raging Bull technically did work for us. Well, I will put an asterisk there. Yeah, it's just, the game is just a lot of people not telling us plot points just to have a dramatic reveal later. We talked about Aprilis and her absolutely nonsensical, you're not ready for the information yet, all the way up until, like, literally the penultimate chapter. Shadowlord knew about the clones. He knew about all these other things. He knew about the true big bad. And also didn't really mention the true big bad to us at all. But it's just, like, a lot of the times, like, there's just so many times these characters had no reason to hide information or even just gloat some information to us. They just chose not to. Raging Bull working with us all along was pretty BS. Oh, I just didn't find the time to tell you. Yeah, whatever, right, chat? Whatever. But yeah, just most of the characters, just very generic and bland. I mean, it's just very disappointing from that. I know, it is so nonsense. I love how they're, like, trying to quote-unquote hide their identities, and, like, several times in the story, we find them blurting out their true identities by accident, and or having, like, extremely suspicious conversations in front of strangers. Like, they're talking about defeating monsters in front of, like, the ticket vendor guy in the Coliseum. Like, what? I'm like, guys. Or, like, or at one point, they're literally in the Coliseum with their family, and then they all mass transform in front of them. And I'm like, what? What? How did no one notice? We're literally in the same seats as them. Give me 1 second, chat. So yeah, they called each other their real names in front of the warden. It was so ridiculous. It's just completely ridiculous. So yeah, I don't really like the setup of the game. I really don't like the clones. I didn't really like where the game went. The plot did nothing new. It played it by the book. I was able to predict it start to finish. Not in, like, a good way. Because sometimes you can predict a plot, you're like, oh, I really wanted to go that way kind of thing, so you can be hopeful. No, this is like a, oh, I bet they're just going to do the lazy, you fight a god at the end, yada yada. Lo and behold, another JRPG where you fight an Eldritch Abomination god thing. I'm like, oh boy. Never change, East, never change. just okay. Even the ending also sucked. That whole, I'm not gonna go into too many details, but that whole thing with the egg, what BS? What BS, chat? So I guess it comes down to, like, they have mechanics from Lacrimosa. They recycled them, but I don't feel like they have the right heart. Like, I feel like the intent of the game is to have fun exploring and to have fun fighting, which I will say are very fun to do. It was very fun to break this game, to not play as the game intended. I had a lot of fun clipping out of bounds, finding new ways to fly, like our rapid swap in order to hover while regaining gift gauge, or rapidly canceling the flight move into a character swap in order to basically lose no vertical height at the cost of gift gauge. Like, that was actually a lot of fun. I didn't really care for the zip movement. I'm kind of glad we upgraded beyond Chapter 1, past that point. We had to use it a few more times in the game, but it was okay. There were some movement abilities I felt were kind of pointless, like, like the biggest disappointment of the game, Jules. I think we used his ability maybe 20 times total. The entire game, maybe less. And it wasn't, and I don't mean like, you know, unique areas. It's more like we were just trying to find uses for it. Honestly, it only opened up like a few dungeons and like 5 treasure chests. Yeah. Jules was easily the worst character of the game. He was the only character that was not really fun to play with. I feel like they're really worried about making a strong range character. Because when you think about games like Lacrimosa or even games like East 7, generally speaking, the range character is kind of garbage. Like, they just can't stun, they don't do a lot of damage, they don't really have like good combos. Obviously, the exception to that rule is Karna from East 4 with her throwing daggers, aka the best character in the game. So I think they were worried about making like another Karna after going through East 4, and they've been really trying hard not to make range characters any good. Like, if you even just look at their skill ranks on a system of C going up to A, with pluses, so you could have A+, for example, or B+, or B++ or something, all the way up to S, or even triple S in some scenarios. A lot of his abilities were just like barely C rank. Like, his starting skills, given how late you get him in the game, it's just like he had like a single B, I think, when we recruited him. And at that point, like, White Cat had all S's, Adel had B+, Hawk had an A or A+. And then, like, a big problem with it is, like, his moves don't really hit stun, and he doesn't do something where he freezes time, which is, like, a big part of having more of the cinematic moves, and that's why White Cat was so OP, because their stun move also freeze frame, meaning you would literally stop the enemy from attacking for half a second every time you press the skill button, which sounds very abusable, because if you have low XP costs on the character, you just loop the freeze frames, and you literally cut out time the enemy is able to attack, to the point where you can restun them. Jules had none of that. He just had nothing going for him. He had bad auto-aim abilities, weak-looking visually attacks, and it just never felt like he did anything impactful. Yeah, they can't make another Karna. Yeah, it's just so disappointing. And just like every role you think he would be good at, like AoE, or like slowing down a field of enemies, or pulling them together, or doing something unique that the melee characters can't do, every single character had a better version of every one of his moves, and he was the biggest disappointment in the game. Like, even like the massive AoE explosion, that's just Raging Bull. All of Raging Bull's attacks have more range and do more damage, and she's tankier, and she hit stuns, and she causes the freeze frames to occur, which I guess I'll call that whenever you stop all enemies. Whereas his is just like, he'll wind up and he'll take a lot of damage, and it costs more SP than every other character's. And the range is like negligibly better in some scenarios. Because more often than not, most of the melee characters had really good range. Like, they either had like a good thrust move, or they had like a big explosive AoE. I think the only exception is White Cat, who doesn't really get an AoE until the end of the game, but like, come on. She had to have, like, a weakness. Well, until the end of the game, of course. So, it's just, like, there was a reason to use other characters. There is literally never a reason to use Jules. Just, like, really weak projectiles. They didn't really get around enemies that could block, which show up around the time you get him. It just felt bad. He felt really bad. I never saw the purpose in playing that character. He had, like, a long-range freeze-frame move, but it's, like, in this game, you also have to consider that you want to flash guard or flash move really often. So more often than not, that just stopped you from getting SP. So you actually just did less damage and were less safe because you had less skills to spam. So, like, it's very counterintuitive, but the range character was I'll call it glass, club, I guess. It's not even a cannon. Like, he shattered. He would shatter swinging himself at people. He felt pretty bad, for sure. I hope they figure out what to do with range characters going forward. He was definitely the biggest combat disappointment. Character-wise, he was okay. I do find it really funny that we basically disregard our entire party's, like, thoughts and feelings for the end of the game. Semi-spoiler. We basically freed them of the Monstrum fate to some extent, but, like, a lot of their lives, we just made a lot worse, and I just found that really unintentionally funny. Like, we re-crippled Jules, who's like in a wheelchair kind of thing, he's have some disease, whatever. But then, like, Krisha is like, oh, I finally have friends and I can finally do things together. We just abandon her straight up. Just leave her. We disband the entire reason for them to meet. It's, like, so horrific. Like, we truly are the villain in this game, for sure. There's other times I joke about it, that Adol is the villain, like when we burn the children in East 1. Which is not what you're supposed to do, but we can do it anyway. But no, this game, he genuinely, as per plot written directions, is just a terrible person. We took away that choice from them. And as I said before, all those moral quandaries, whether it's good or not to leave in the Grimwald Nox so that way you could deal with the people's repressed emotions or whatever, or if they should be freed of the curse, but then potentially things could overwhelm them in the future. You don't get to make that choice. That choice is taken away from you. So, yeah, just kind of lame. I was also looking up that apparently this game also only has one ending, which is sad. I mean, it makes sense. There can't really be a bad ending per se. It's not like in Lacrimosa where we recruit people and we're able to make a difference for like the final battle. I'll try not to spoil Lacrimosa in this review, but like there's a reason you collect all the people other than just to save them and build up a colony. It does impact what ending you get, but no, this one only has one ending. So from a replayability standpoint, between the plot and the singular ending, it's pretty disappointing. Yeah, I would fully agree with that. What else do we really have to say about the game? I guess I could talk about the music. I will say the music so far has been pretty good. I think there's several dungeon themes that are pretty nice. I think overall, I still preferred Lacrimosa soundtrack. It has like a lot of good songs. Most to some are forgettable. There's not really like a bad song. I can't really think of one where I was like, oh, get me out of here, other than the really sappy ending song, which I didn't like. But that's more of a personal preference. I just feel like Lacrimosa, like if we were gonna talk about like a song that got me in the mood for the game, Lacrimosa just had more songs per event that I can think of where I was like, wow, I really want to play the game, or wow, this really gets me in the mood for the area. Yeah, like that first Lacrimosa song was so good. Like when you first come out to the beach and it just starts with that, you're like, oh my gosh, I want to see where the game goes. It got me in the mood for it. Let's go. This game, some of the dungeon themes, I think, approached that level, but I don't feel like they were... The problem is, again, like, it just had, like, issues with the plot tie-in. Like, yeah, I'm glad you brought up Coloca Maxima, one of the first dungeons in the game, where it's like, oh, you're like, oh, I get to explore, and this is something cool you get to do. I think the problem, too, is, like, it didn't tie me into, like, the feeling of the character. Like, it was a good song, but it, with the plot, did not mesh with me very well. Like, it's a good dungeon theme, but it's not... It doesn't evoke imagery. Like, the bubbliness of the Sunshine Coastline, and just, like, how much, like, energy it had is, like, mimicking Adol's first, like, visitation on the island, finally seeing, like, what it is other than, like, a shipwreck. And it just tied together so well thematically, as well as being a good song. Whereas the other one's, like, yeah, it's a dungeon. You know, we never really had, like, that big moving moment. Like, even games like Zestiria, which I love to bash on the stream and other final thoughts, even that game had a song that I will remember, as bad as that plot was and as nonsensical as it was, because the song was so powerful in the moment that it's like one of those things you will remember. I didn't really get that feeling from this game. Like, it's a good soundtrack. I'd probably listen to it again. I'd probably give it... Like, it sounds, like, low, but I give it, like, a solid 7. Like, it's a little above average for the most part. Some of the town themes I probably skipped through. But, you know, decent. Like, is it... If we're gonna talk about, like, overall soundtrackness to other games we've even played, like, it's not on the same level as Hades. It's not on the same level as Lacrimosa. It's not on the same level as some of the Suikoden soundtracks we've listened to. And it's just like, it's not any fault of the composer. A lot of it just has to do with the framing of how it's done and some of the direction they're given. Again, a lot of these songs, you could listen to them. They're pretty neat, but it's like, it doesn't give me the same driving factor. Like, we didn't have like that powerful anime intro we would see in like a JRPG of a game of a competing factor. We didn't get like really crazy ending song. I mean, he had like the sappy song. I don't like those though, but yeah, it's just kind of missing that Dandelion music versus Suikoden Castle theme. Not Suikoden Castle theme though. Like, I just feel like the combat themes in Suikoden are super good, and they bring up like the tension. Whereas like this game, it's just not really. It didn't really play into like horror themes very well, or you know, like panic and distress. Like, there's never a song where it's like it ever put me in like the state that the character is supposed to feel at the time. And again, some of that has to do with the plot framing, how it's used in the game. Like, it's not necessarily a fault of the song itself. Like, it could be a perfectly serviceable song. I just don't feel like the soundtrack was used in such a way that would really get me into any of the events we were seeing. Not saying like it's generic, but it's more... It doesn't quite emotionally tie the way it needs to do to have like a really powerful, memorable soundtrack. Like, I might listen to this like title theme music a little bit and remember it. I might remember Cloak of Maxima, but like I will always remember the first time I heard things. Like a Suikoden 3 intro, it's like, as much as I don't like the game for like its other faults, like that intro for me is like, I will remember that to like the end of time. It was like such a good combination of visuals and sound. And I just don't feel like they got up to this level in Ys. You know, it is what it is. So anyway, let's move on from the music. Sound issues. There were a lot of them. There were a whole ton of them. This game gave me the feeling of being rushed, and I'm really surprised. Like, we're playing this like a year plus out from initial Steam release. Not even console release, from Steam release, which was already like a 6-month delay. So like, sitting there and listening to some of the stuff, like, I cannot believe they left it in the state that it was in particular chapter 7 to 9. Holy F, the sound balancing was so screwed up. It was so bad. We had lines that were, I'm just gonna talk like this. This is for some reason my speaking voice. And it's like, it's so quiet. And then we had other lines that are like, hey, Adel, how you doing? And there's like, they're just like, there's such a big volume difference between the two. And I like had to, I had to remind myself and the chat where I'm like, I purposely put volume a notch or two above music, right? Because, like, I could barely hear characters like Aprilis during some of their lines. Anemona sometimes had that issue. Aprilis, I think, is the big issue. I think she had the most lines where I was like, I legit cannot hear this character over the music. There were weird, like, microphone issues with some of the characters, which I think is the first in any Ys game. So I don't know, like, what precipitated that. I don't remember if the Big Bad had sound issues in particular. Morbihan was also kind of weird, but I was thinking actually Shadowlord. Shadowlord had some weird microphone quality issues. I don't know if they just couldn't record him in the same studio. He had kind of like an echo in half of his lines. Yeah, I don't know if it's because of COVID lockdown or something. But like, because it would have been like more than 2 years ago that they would have started recording for it. That's why I'm a little confused. So I guess it's possible. Like it was like at the tail end of 2020 that this started happening. But yeah, there was some weird audio. But I mean, it comes back to this fact that it's like, it's now been out for over more than a year at this point, even on Steam. But they couldn't touch some of this up. Even in post-production, like the volume issues you could touch up. You don't need them to re-record it. They just need to rebalance them. But like legitimately, like I could not hear some of the characters over music as soft and as quiet as this. Like, let alone like the action scenes where I'm like, gosh only knows what they're saying. You just throw your hands in the air. I'm like glad there's subtitles, because I didn't hear what they said at all. So just very strange to me. That's like that. They gave Adel more voice lines in this game, which was kind of funny. We were laughing because, like, there's a reveal when Adel's a clone and he's having a heart-to-heart with his clone self, and his clone self will not shut the fuck up. He just will not stop talking. And I'm like, oh, I guess he learns he's not the silent protagonist. You just let him rattle on. It's fine. just endless voice lines. I'm like, okay, fake Adel. Like, I get it. You're voiced by the character that does Silver the Hedgehog or whatever. Like, move on. It's no use, apparently. Just roll your eyes. Nothing you can do about it. But yeah, like, will I remember the city of Balduke, I guess, ultimately in the future? Probably not. it's towns. I mean, it's more like a city than like a town from the other Ys games. Unfortunately, going back into the laziness factor, I forgot to mention one more thing. They basically reused the bosses from all of their other games, and I know it's a plot point that they were taken from Addle's memories, but it doesn't make it any less of like a copy-paste. Like, yeah, they up-res some of the models. Lacrimosa ones, I think, were taken almost literally verbatim. But yeah, the monster design does not really inspire me at all. I don't think most of them will be memorable. And I think that leads into the last point of like the reusing of the models. We mentioned before for the NPCs, they reused the sprite for the super boss. How dare they? How dare they make an optional super boss with the same generic graphic as an enemy you come across in raids? Like, that is actually super lazy. There is no excuse for that one. There is no excuse how lazy that is. Yeah, they literally just were like, select target, scale up 150%. There's your boss. Like, seriously? Lame. Yeah, I think there were several points throughout the game where I just declared how lame it was. Oh, Chad, I almost forgot the biggest cop-out of all. There were so many times, even in the main story, but in particular for the side quests. I mean, like, not every line will be voiced, but this game takes it to a whole new level. The game narrates to us what's happening on screen, and it fades to black rather than animating anything that they're talking about. It was embarrassing when that happened in the Coliseum, where Dogi was originally fighting somebody, and they panned to him blocking, and then they fade to black, and it's like, Dogi is on the defense for several minutes. And I'm like, are these like actual directions for what is supposed to be the plot? Did they actually run out of time making this game? Like, I felt like that a lot while playing this game, where I'm like, why are they narrating this to us? Why aren't they actually just playing out the scene? Did they just not want to do the models for the characters? Like, is it a money issue? Is it like a time issue? Like, this was not like a one-off event. It was just embarrassing for the Dogi Coliseum fight, though. Like, you're trying to tell me this big, important, epic thing is, they're like, wow, you go, Dogi, and they don't even show Dogi in the arena. It just keeps panned to the audience. They don't even show you what you're supposed to be looking at when the narration's done. I'm like, wow, that is actually so sad. So yeah, very embarrassing, I will say, plot-wise. This was easily the worst Ys game. And I'm even gonna include the non-3D old 1980s Ys. I think had better plot, more consistency, and more interesting NPCs than this game. I'm willing to state it. They phoned it in, but even then they didn't phone it in because there was no audio. They placeholdered it in, I guess. Like, not even the older Ys games placeholdered you like that. Like, they would fade to black for a character explaining, like, what Addle's background is, because you don't want to hear it, like, 30 times in the plot. Like, that's fine. That's acceptable. But this game did it for, like... And then Addle took Krisha to the flower shop, and then they placed orders, and then they returned to the dandelion. Would be like a sample narration, rather than just showing you these things. It's just so silly. But yeah, this game felt kind of like a cop-out. So I guess we'll wrap it up with our true final thoughts. I cannot think of anything to add, but if the chat has anything they'd like to say from their personal experience from either playing the game or watching the game, this is your time. You get to be part of the final thoughts / the last thoughts for the game. But ultimately, I will say, I might return to the game, not for the plot, not for the characters, purely to see how much I can break it. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot about that scene. Yeah, yeah, I don't know why they gave Addle, like, they had like this whole thing where Addle's taught how to smoke a cigar, and that one had like such a long verbal description of how to smoke in real life, and I'm like, is this okay to teach other, like, potentially children watching this game how to take in a puff? Like, seriously? This is what we're gonna spend time on and give added descriptions to? Not any of the other side lore stuff? So ridiculous. But yeah, I just feel like we'll revisit it again, maybe, to break the game. I haven't decided if or when we're gonna do a full New Game Plus as finding out the boss levels scaled based off of our level potentially is actually such a huge turnoff to me. I really don't want to fight super tanky and long drawn out boring boss fights. Like on a New Game Plus, like I understand they want it to be challenging, but then they don't do that for the regular enemies. So the regular enemies still die in like a single swing. So I don't know, the game balance is super whack. I think I agree with Chris. If I had to recommend, okay, I guess if I had to think of all the party-based Ys games, how I would recommend it, I would say potentially for a more traditional plot with enough intrigue to keep you into the game, or if you like Doki, I would say Ys 7 would probably be the one to play. If you like a fairly, well, not fairly, if you like a more linear RPG, but you really like breaking the game, I will say Ys 4 would be the game for you. If you like a combination of plot and a little bit of a relationship building up, and you want to build an actual bond with the people that you're talking to, Lacrimosa was much better. If you just want to have fun messing around in combat, and you want to zip around, and you just want to do all this crazy vertical movement, which is not a thing you will get in many games at all, then I would recommend this game. But from like an overall solid approach, I feel like this game was a step down compared to its predecessor. It took a lot in terms of mechanics, like the raids and some of the flashguard stuff. And I feel like where it tried to do something different, it failed kind of miserably outside the movement, like pretty badly. Gary stands around in the bar and gets an off-screen tournament. Yeah, it just. But yeah, just even though like the characters kind of join you arbitrarily in a game like Ys 4, even though that game was fairly linear, I still feel like that plot was better than this game's plot. I just straight up feel that way. This game just felt like an inferior product comparatively plot-wise. So hopefully they take another look at it. I know they were trying to think of an excuse to give you superpowers, and that's why the plot really took a hit. Because it's basically a what-if scenario given life in a game form, rather than being its own kind of nice standalone story. Yeah. I think the only other thing I have to add is that I do think it was interesting to see some cameo references to the other games. I thought that was kind of neat. We don't normally see a lot of throwbacks to characters we haven't seen in a while, like the goddesses, for example. Or even literally Lacrimosa of Dana got an appearance. So, I guess that was neat. Sort of. But yeah. Anyway, chat, I have nothing more to say about the game, so we're going to wrap up this final thoughts. Unfortunately, no Sylvia. Yeah, meta references were fun. So that's all I have to say about the game. Hopefully that will give you a more informed opinion about it. I mean, I guess if you agree or disagree, you're more than welcome to write some comments below the YouTube video when this gets uploaded. But, still quoting Bane was weird. Yeah, I don't get why she was quoting about the nobody cared about me until I wore the mask. Yeah, that was, I feel like that would have been an in-joke of the translators. I feel like it was an in-joke of the translators. I don't think I think it got through because the other people just didn't watch Batman. I think that's what was happening there. But anyway, I guess that's it for now. I guess we talked about every other character. I didn't talk about every possible side character you come across. I guess the most interesting thing you could say about the game is you could put Pickards on everybody's shoulders, I guess. Yay, character customization? Question mark? Nobody cared about her after she took the mask off either, yeah. Burned the silhouette there. So anyway, yeah, Pickards. They sort of brought back Ruse, I guess. Kind of a throwback. Kind of. But anyway, I guess that's it for now. So if you've been watching on the YouTube, thank you for going through the rambling of this particular game. Again, it's kind of one of those weird things where I actually did have a lot of fun with it, but there were a lot of frustrating moments, in particular with the plot. So just be warned if you do pick up the game, or if you were curious about my final thoughts on it. Thank you for getting to this point in the video, and hope to see you again in the next series.